Yeah, go ahead.
So I recorded at Cal's great little studio over in Austin, and I'm surprised that you and I haven't actually met each other because I'm friends with like so many people that you're friends with.
It's
I've come to
surprising.
realize.
It's surprising. I think
Yeah,
are we in a text message thread with
with the Kingsburys and all that.
Kingsbury's and the Rubchinskys?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's the So Fresh or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, you're in So Fresh. Okay, there's some new
That's
names
me.
in there. I
Yeah,
think
I'll have
he's
to
in
add
there.
your number later.
Yeah. All right, so we're in the
um,
same text message thread with a group of crazy people. That's
bunch of
we're
crazy
just now figuring it out.
Austinians.
There's about 15 people in there, maybe something
That's
like
how
that.
big the Austin crowd is, though. It's like all of my friends seem to live in Austin now. So, um, anyways, one of those people, Cal, who's not in that text thread, he had me on his podcast, and I don't even think the episode is released yet. His podcast is like backlogged, but he was like, he handed me Feel Free. We were blowing these bags, of which I have now,
I just finished
and
mine. Yeah.
yeah, it's a nice break when you're podcasting, like an hour without nicotine. But Cal handed me a Feel Free, and of course I drank it. I usually do it in like halves, but I finished the bottle because we're just bullshitting the whole time. And then while we're recording, maybe like 45 minutes in, he pops another one.
Oh wow.
I was like, shit, okay, well, when in Rome, and his niece Lindsay, who helps with like the production, she hands me one. Like, he's having one. Do you want one too? And I didn't even think anything of it. I
Oh
took it and
no.
I finished it within a couple minutes. And man, dude, I was buzzing. Like, I felt out of my body. Kratom is nothing to mess with if you're kind of naive to it. And afterwards, I was like nauseated. It wasn't like I felt ill. I just didn't want to do anything. I just wanted to lay there. And so now that was like my wall. I hit my wall. Beyond that, I wouldn't have been able to speak coherently anymore. So I was like trembling. I had sweaty palms. And so, anyways, when you podcast with people who like using substances, there's no way around it. It's just a part of the deal, I
Yeah.
suppose.
The most aggressive pre-podcast substance use is with consistently with Kyle Kingsbury. It's
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
it's,
He's one
it's
of my
like
dearest friends, and there's always something new. He's like, "Do you want to try this kratom?" And he handed me like little pellets, and I was like, "Yeah, okay." And I felt good. I mean, it was like a little bit of a body high, but yeah, yeah, totally. He's
yeah.
like
I
Mr.
the
Human
mistake
Optimization.
I don't even do it anymore. If I'm gonna there's certain people that if I'm gonna podcast with, I don't take anything beforehand because I know that there's gonna be something, and if I take something, then I'm not gonna turn down what they have. Next thing you know, we're flying high. I know Kyle and I did that one day. I took all my stuff beforehand, and then I showed up, and then we started doing other stuff, and uh, I think it makes for a great show. Makes for a great show.
Stuff just starts kind of like more organically kind of rolling off the tongue, so to speak.
Yeah. So if anyone's wondering, we were talking about Feel Free, which I'm not sponsored by Feel Free. Are you?
I'm not sponsored by them. No, they don't do sponsorships. JW is a buddy of mine, but I just promote it once in a while on Instagrams, and
Yeah.
everybody I every time we have people over, I'll have a box of it there for people to try. But some people get really hooked on it too. So
Oh
I
yeah,
like,
I've known a few.
yeah, I will need to be like, full disclaimer. I am a doctor. I understand the pharmacology of this. Yes, it's not addictive, but I have known people who've had, they get to 3 bottles a day and they have a hard time getting off
Well,
of
if
it
they come off,
altogether.
they don't
So
feel too good. That's
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah. Um
Has its purpose. It's a
I
tool.
I drink like half a bottle once a week. Half a bottle once a week. Let's dig
Oh,
into
man.
you.
Let's do it.
Yeah, again, we've been circling each other for a long time. Still haven't met in
Sure.
person. We're doing this virtually, and you started popping up in my Instagram feed, and I'm like, and then somebody asked me if I knew you, and I said no, but I know who that guy is, and
Same for you, Mike.
I know who this guy is, but uh, no, and they were talking, very highly of you, and I started paying more attention to what you were saying on Instagram, and I really like how you have taken a lot of the questions that people are posing to you, and then creating really great reels out of them, and even the people who are, you know, uh, trolling you, which I like to troll people sometimes. It's not necessarily all that bad, but it, it get it, it I love how I think a lot of people who are trying to put out good content, they they have the trolls come in, and then that brings them down. They're like, and they go, "Oh, I don't know if I should be posting because someone
Yeah.
doesn't like it." And then you
Yeah.
just flip it and say, "You know what? I'm going to address it head on," and it ends up
Let's
being,
double down.
yeah, double down, and it turns into really good content. So I applaud you for that, and that's one of the things that stand out. Like that's one thing that shows that you're very grounded into your perspective, and your shit. Because if you don't, then that's usually when people get nervous. Like, I
Yeah.
don't know what I'm really saying.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah. So you're you can correct me. This is my understanding of where you're coming from. You're an OBGYN, MD, also
Mhm.
Czech practitioner, and it sounds like you're a big proponent of keeping things as natural as possible, um, but also leveraging the Western medicine when necessary to make birthing children the best possible situation,
Right.
and give them the best opportunity for the mother and the child. Yeah, can you say any more to that? Did
I
I
think you
nail it?
nailed it, man.
Yeah.
I think you nailed it. Yeah. Yeah. In typical fashion, the host of the podcast just gets it. Um, I think one thing I would add is I probably came to my understanding of how to best sit with birth through my own experience becoming a father, which I
Mm-hmm.
don't think we as men, we're very accomplished in our various domains. I certainly have so many certificates that I don't even have enough wall space, so they're in some closet somewhere. And I mean, I'm talking like diplomas and board certifications and all this stuff. But when it comes down to birth, like it's not like there's a right answer to how to do this. And I'm also a hospice doctor, so my two specialties are
Mm.
birth, and my subspecialty is death. And when you've sat with so much of this, you start to realize, oh my God, all those tools in this super complicated, well organized, often poorly organized toolkit I have are not really all that relevant when we're just talking about getting through life. And the two things you have to go through, Mike, you were born, you might be a father someday. Are you a dad now? I don't even know.
Not yet. We're working towards it. That's actually one of the things that motivated me to get you on the call, is because my fiance and I have just been in deep conversation about
How about doing it?
preparing. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we can talk about that. Mike Salemi and I just recorded a great podcast on
Ah.
his show where I just kind of spit in the most elegant way that I can about the role of a man in pregnancy and birth, which the medical doctors are not necessarily thinking about. They're thinking about what intervention to use at the right time. And likewise with death, there's not like this is not a problem to solve. It seems like a problem because we've been at war with nature for several hundred, if not thousands of years. We've been trying to figure out how to get around this tricky situation, which is death. And I will say most women that I've sat with in birth will relate to me the this sort of conflict of heart that occurs, that arises within childbirth, and the same language. I've experienced the same language from people who've come back from near death experiences and whatever. Like they stepped into this other space. You can say through a portal, for example, and it was pure bliss. Now, that's not to say that childbirth is necessarily pure bliss, but there's this transformation that happens that is not a medical problem. There's no issue to solve here. This is something that needs to be surrendered to. And if you fight it, if you try to get in there and muck around, in the way that Rene Descartes perhaps would like to think of it as a car, do all the things with the organs and everything goes better. We're finding that it's actually quite the opposite with death and with birth. So, as you said in the intro, I've got all these great tools, antibiotics, I've got pharmaceuticals, I've got hormonal contraception, I've got surgery skills, all these things. I'm not finding that those are all that useful in the two specialties that I've dedicated myself towards, which is actually a great thing. I can still use those tools if necessary, but my whole career is unfolding in front of me as somebody who can advocate on behalf of reconnecting ourselves with nature, which is really a matter of loving ourselves, loving our partners, and surrendering to this process of welcoming children into the world.
Yeah. I remember I first started getting interested in the whole birth conversation, man, maybe it was over 10 years ago. I watched The Business of Being Born, the
Yeah, about Ricky
documentary
Lake
with
and
Ricky Lake.
Abby Epstein. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I watched that, and I don't know. You could probably tell me more. Is all that very accurate? And then when I watched that, it really hit me like that we've turned childbirth into this medical condition, or being
Yeah,
pregnant into a medical condition, and the at some point, people in general, but women specifically with this situation, just handed everything over to a doctor in a white lab coat and stopped being involved. And then men were never around for it. Is that, it doesn't sound natural to me. It doesn't sound like, I was born in a hospital in a room with fluorescent
yeah.
lights beaming down on
Mm.
top of me. you know, was that an optimal way to bring a new life into the world? Probably not. I think my parents did a pretty good job, like choosing a good doctor and everything. But it seems to me we have about 100 years of disconnect
Yeah,
from the natural way of doing things. So it's
yeah,
been something I've been, when I knew I was going to marry my fiance now, I was like, oh, do you want to do home birth? And those types of questions come up because that matters to me. Um, and I think that most men don't even think about that. But the where I'm at in my life now is I one of the reasons I chose the woman I did is because I wanted this person to raise my children, and I'm
mm.
concerned with the development of those people.
Yeah, yeah. And I know a lot of your listeners are probably young men, 20s and 30s, let's say. And as I mentioned before, we haven't really had this modeled for us as to what we can do. What is our role in this? We've all been focused on getting our Olympic lifting numbers up, getting our macros in order. That stuff bores the hell out of me now. Because while it is important maybe for a period of your life, we then emerge into a space where we want to save the world with this we want less bigotry, we want more freedom, we want all these things. If we can't get birthright, there's no way any of that is possible. And I'll elaborate on that a little bit. When a woman is left undisturbed in childbirth, she generally will not find herself on her back with bright lights and machines making beeping sounds. She'll find herself in a very quiet place, on the floor often, knees together, in almost a prayer position, looking at the floor. Similarly to when you lift up something heavy, your body will go into, like, biomechanically into a position that makes sense. Part of that has been practicing. It's not like you can practice for childbirth, but a woman will assume a position that maybe doesn't make sense because of what we've been shown on TV or what we've read even in books, where you see a person with their legs pulled back and they're screaming and all this commotion. That is one way that you can have a baby. And that is the way that probably 99% of babies are coming into the world, um, especially if they're being brought out by C-section. When a woman is on the floor looking down, she's taking her brain out of the equation. And that's really important. Just like with any running or climbing or whatever, you're not really thinking, you're just flowing, you're just moving in a way that makes sense. When you activate a person's brain, I'm talking about the big part of the brain, this big, beautiful, sexy neocortex that we've developed as Homo sapiens. It's unique to us that we have a brain this complicated. And when you activate that, we start to be thoughtful. We start to receive judgment. Our insecurities arise, and it oftentimes triggers our fight or flight or freeze system through the catecholamines. That's adrenaline, noradrenaline, also known as epinephrine, norepinephrine. When those chemicals surge, you have an important problem. Number one, labor stops because you're unsafe. It's not safe to have a baby right now. We see this in the mammal world everywhere. And we, of course, are part of nature, even though we have, through transhumanistic, diatribes and dialect and talking heads about uploading our consciousness into a hard drive and all this nonsense, we're still a part of nature. So if we look at a lioness, she will flee for safety if she's giving birth and there's like something prowling in the woods over here. And that's because the catecholamines actually suppress the activities of hormones like oxytocin.
Mm.
So let me like riff for a minute, if I may, about oxytocin. Oxytocin is this massive molecule. I used to be really into the molecules because of organic chemistry and whatnot. If you look at serotonin, dopamine, they're relatively small. You know, these rings, and there's some little side chains and whatnot. Oxytocin's like this big. If you go to Wikipedia, it's this massive molecule. It's produced in the hypothalamus, stored in the pituitary, and when you're feeling connected, it's because of, and it actually influences the release of more of oxytocin, which is also known as the love hormone. Oxytocin, Mike, floods your body to cause you to ejaculate. It causes the full body orgasm. And I'm not, when we use the word orgasm, this is like one step below full transcendence, divinity, orgasm. We're not talking about ejaculation. We're talking about this full body experience that goes beyond the physical into the energetics. This is the ability to transcend the physical reality, is orgasm. Oxytocin governs over that. It also governs over sperm and egg meeting by causing a quivering of the uterus, bringing sperm up to the fallopian tubes. It also is flooding the body throughout pregnancy and into childbirth at the time of what's called the fetal ejection reflex. It causes the baby to actually be ejected from the uterus at the right time. And then it also helps with milk letdown. And also, I mean, like, let's bear in mind when you're connecting with somebody on a deep level, oxytocin's flooding both of your bloodstreams, which makes you just want to get closer to them. It's that feeling after sex, you know? So if a woman is left undisturbed, the baby and she are going to both be flooded with the love hormone. If you activate the neocortex and cause any disruption between the catecholamines and the rest of the endocrine system, labor can stop altogether. And more importantly, the baby's not being flooded with endogenous, meaning produced in your brain, oxytocin, the love hormone. So as we start intervening more and more in childbirth, and that question, what's your fiance's name?
Ashley.
So when you and Ashley are talking about where do we want to have a baby, it's important that you guys have a baby where she feels most safe and can be left alone to do the things that she wants to do. That may be in the hospital, it might be at home, it might be out in the woods for all I care. The point being that if a woman is disturbed sufficiently, it actually disrupts the entire labor process,
Mm.
similar to the lioness who hears some hyenas in the brush and doesn't want to give birth there because it doesn't feel safe. So the bigger problem is that as we see more interventions, more C-sections, more assisted reproductive technology, whereby we're jacking off into a cup, we're then also injecting hormones into the woman, harvesting her eggs with a big long needle that goes in through the vagina into the ovary, pulls out the eggs. The egg and sperm are like forced together in a petri dish, and then that embryo is implanted in the uterus. That is a process completely devoid of love. That's not to say it's not important for some people and that I don't honor and acknowledge that that's sometimes the path. But nowadays, instead of getting everybody's health in order from the physical through the mental, emotional, and spiritual levels, we're going more and more towards in a direction where generations of kids are going to be born not in love, not out of oxytocin, but out of these medical interventions that make the whole process far more like Brave New World as opposed to bringing more love and life into the world. So that's my diatribe about oxytocin.
Love it. Love it. So so the thing I'm taking out of that mostly in my own personal situation is not being too I don't really get to choose where she's going to have the child.
Sure.
Like it's wherever she feels safest. So whatever. So I got to get out of the way and pull my own agenda out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so as I mentioned, Mike Salemi and I, do you know Mike? You friends with
Yeah, I'm good
Mike?
friends with Mike. Yeah.
So Mike and I, we were riffing on his podcast, and his question was, like I said, what's the man's job? Well, since your listenership is, there's probably a number of 20 something, 30 something year old guys who maybe haven't been to a birth or helped their partner through birth. There is so much you can do, but the doing is actually in the act of not doing. It's really in this concept of holding space. And as guys, we're used to coming to every situation with an answer. And if you can't get the answer, you're an incompetent man. If you don't know how to swing a hammer, you're a a buffoon. If you can't lift big heavy weights and you can't figure out how to outsmart your competitor and get faster, stronger, bigger, whatever, you're a buffoon. In the UFC, you need to be able to fight stronger. Like, we're always coming to the conversation with a problem that needs to be solved, but there's no problem here to be solved. Holding space is actually the art of doing nothing, but there's a lot you do while you're doing nothing. It's creating the container for this incredible transformation to unfold. And that's where I think there's a lot of conversation to be had, because nobody's either modeling this for us or even talking about it. It's just, you need to get your birth plan notarized, and you need to advocate for your partner. That might be helpful in some situations, but if you're just coming in there puffing your chest, showing how tough and loud you can be, you're going to be scaring her, you're going to be scaring the staff. This whole thing just, it precipitates into an otherwise uh, into a potentially catastrophic situation, because babies are not to be born through the lens of intellectualism and outsmarting one another and bringing the data to the doctor and saying, look at the data. Like, that, you're not going to win that battle. Here's somebody who's been looking at data for 50 years. Your job is to figure out how you and your partner are going to connect. What does my partner need? What does doing nothing look like for them? Does it make it so that they don't ever have to even lift a finger? Does it involve giving some specific pressure to certain parts of the body? Um, there's so much to it, and it seems like it's so simple, but it's actually quite a practice for us men to go into a situation with the intention of not providing the solution, because there's no answer to this incredibly beautiful but yet challenging experience of bringing a child into the world.
It sounds like, it's the same answer during childbirth as it is the rest of the time, which is create safety.
Yeah,
And
yeah, that's exactly right. I love that.
looking, I
Yeah,
mean, that's what I see my primary job as a man is for the women in my life, and primarily my fiance.
yeah.
So I think about this evolutionarily now that you're talking about it. 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, what do you know what the child birthing process was like? I imagine it. Women were helping each other out. Maybe men weren't present, or do you know any of those stories?
I do. Yeah, I did this. You should check out this episode I did on my podcast, 72, in which I did a brief ish history of Western medicine, witches, and women healers. And I really talked about how, with changing cosmologies, women were actually sort of ousted from the healing space. And many women will argue, I think pretty convincingly, that women always cared for women in childbirth. That's probably true. Men probably didn't play any role. But I actually think there was even less of women caring for women than we tend to realize. The word obstetrics. So I'm an obstetrician and gynecologist. That means I do everything in the world of women's health, including attending to birth, but also GYN surgery, birth control, blah blah blah, infections, all that stuff. The obstetrics part is maternity care, and obstetrics. The Greek root is obstetrics, but with an X, and that word literally translates to standing opposite from or opposite to. And that was really the original sort of essence of midwifery, is that I'm just holding space for you. I'm just here letting you know that you are safe. You can go inward, sort of like a psychedelic journey. You can go inward knowing that you're not going to get hit by a car. You're not
Yeah.
doing drugs out in the middle of the street in Times Square. You're doing it in a safe space where you know that you can just go inward without worrying about these external things disrupting the process. So in my research, I've found that more often, way back, let's say 1,000 years, women were standing opposed to women and guarding the space in which they are going through this incredible rite of passage. And I call it a rite of passage because no initiation is a true initiation unless death is on the line. So many women who go through this feel like they died. They're looking mortality straight in the eyes for maybe the first time in their entire life. That doesn't feel very safe. So if we're going to ask them questions and intervene and stick our hands in their vagina without getting full consent, that's all adding to this really scary process. So if it's already scary, and if the way that we do this, quote, right, is by allowing them to go inward, then the role of the woman caring for a woman was to prevent anybody from coming into her space and disturbing her. And that very likely is actually what a midwife used to be. It, of course, evolved from there, where women were the ones making botanicals and using plant medicine. And I don't mean plant medicines the way that people talk about it. I mean like herbal tinctures
Like
and
original
remedies from,
medicine.
yeah, the original medicine. While the males who coined this profession of medicine were using entrails and dung and all this other gross stuff. The midwives, the women, the healers who were caring for the elderly, the sick, the children, and women in childbirth, they were figuring it out along the way. They were the original empiricists. And of course, that eventually led to, you have a bottle of some tincture on your shelf, you must be a witch. And for 3 or 4 centuries, we were just massacring women and children simply because they were accused of witchcraft. But over the years, as our cosmologies have changed, women used to have a very, very central role in the healing professions, but they were gradually ousted. And then, of course, we killed millions of them during the witch hunts. But the profession of midwifery was always about a more gentle approach to nudging the body back onto a healthy course, as opposed to forcing a woman's body to do something that it otherwise wouldn't be able to do. And that's through the lens of modern medicine, we've reduced it down to the sum of parts. We will add synthetic stuff, do surgeries that may or may not be required, because we think we're in control of nature as opposed to a part of nature, going back to that part of the conversation. So I think back in the day, yes, a lot of women and children died in childbirth, but it wasn't because of a lack of fetal heart rate monitoring, which, by the way, has never been validated ever. It's just this thing we look at, and its only real um, lasting effect within maternity care was to produce more C-sections, because now we're dropping the knife every time the baby's heart rate drops, and
Oh,
that's
wow.
not good either. So it wasn't because of a lack of technology that women were dying. It was probably a little bit of septic conditions. There wasn't a lot of sterility back then, and you get an infection in the uterus. We didn't have antibiotics, so there's not really a way to treat it. It wasn't until World War II that we really had widespread blood banks and antibiotics. That's a big win for Western medicine. Beyond that, I'm not so sure we've done much good. If anything, we've done a lot of harm, because there are certain places in the world where 90% of babies are coming out through an incision in the abdomen before labor even ensues. Talk about like being birthed without any of the love hormone. So that's the best I can say. I think that this is really, there's plenty of books written on this. And unfortunately, women weren't the ones doing a lot of the writing. A lot of men, the victors, so to speak, were writing on behalf of this process. And the reason that midwifery was kept alive is because it was kind of this underground thing, women passing information and experience and knowledge onto other women through like the apprenticeship model, which, I mean, whatever happened to that, where you just practice and practice and practice until you kind of feel good about it. I was in a Lakota sweat lodge with Monsell last time I was in Austin, and the guy Ryan, who was leading the lodge, he told us that he spent 10 years just being a part of the sweat lodge experience over and
Mm-hmm.
over and over again until they actually let him pour the water. Like, that should blow people's minds. You spend 10 years practicing something before you're even allowed to do it. Now people go to like a weekend long retreat and they call themselves combo, medicine men. And not that I have a problem with combo. I'm just, it's like there's no initiation ever anymore. So, um,
Yeah, I like
so
what you
anyways,
said
yeah,
earlier, that initiation is important. You said your life has to be on the line for it to be a
yeah,
true initiatory process. And when I've sat with my fair share of ayahuasqueros, and uh you can tell when someone spent 6 months in the jungle on dieta.
yeah,
There's something they've got something that most people don't have, and
yeah,
they they subsisted on very little and sat with the medicine in the jungle and under mosquito nets, and I have many friends that have done vision quests and things like that, where
Yeah.
there's a point where you're like, oh, I'm going to die, or something. Your mortality becomes very, very real. And the thing about someone who's been in, I've done a handful of sweat lodges myself, and yeah, sometimes there's a little conversation you have with yourself. You go, oh,
Yeah.
like, did I just fuck up? did I?
Yeah.
This is a little
Yeah.
much,
Yeah.
looking around, it's like,
Yeah.
well, no one else is dying yet, but it feels like I might. Um, but to
Yeah.
do that for 10 years and just to be able to pour the water,
Just to
that's
pour the water. Yeah.
that's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah. I think the ritual and ceremony is we're sorely lacking that any longer, which is why so many men, going back to the what do men do to support women in birth, like you work on yourself. You get yourself ready to give a piece of yourself to another person that will always be your child. There's no way around it. Even if you leave, you hit the road and you leave forever and never call back, there's still a person out there that knows you as their father. So we expect that it's like going to be fine, and then you just have to get through the sleep issues and whatnot. No, parenthood is a completely initiatory rite, and the work starts now. I don't know if you've read The Erotic and the Holy
No.
or heard that Audible book. It's by a guy
Mm-mm.
named Mark Gaffney. He's a Hebrew mystic,
Oh, I'm
and he talks
I'm
about these.
very familiar with Mark Gaffney.
Okay, so it's a
Yeah.
master class that was produced by Sounds True, and
Ah.
it's a really, really good listen for anybody out there who's actually thoughtful about this. Nowadays everybody's talking about polyamory and this and that. The only person I know who's actually made polyamory work is Paul Chek. And it just works. But I think it was years and years and years of making it work. I don't want to speak for him and Penny and Angie, but by the way, I was their OBGYN. That's actually how I got to know the Chek family.
Ah.
And so this polyamory thing is really hot right now. Everybody who has a pair of testicles has become bored with having sex with the person that they chose to have sex with for the rest of their lives. It doesn't matter. You could be the hottest supermodel, whoever it is that you think is the most beautiful person in the world. There's somebody who's grown tired of having sex with them.
Yeah.
So what's up with that? Mark Gaffney's work, I haven't read all of his books because he's a pretty prolific writer, and some of his stuff is a little hard to digest. You have to really study it.
Yeah.
But in this,
Yeah.
in this,
I've actually got to spend time with him, which,
have you really?
yeah, 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 days on end. Um, and I absorb most of it through that, not through his. I've read a couple of his books, but yeah, most of it is absorbed in person. So yeah, have you read? I don't
You have to tell
necessarily
me
know
that.
the
You have to
books,
tell me
but
about
yeah,
that
we'll have to
sometime.
chat about that later.
Yeah. Well, one big takeaway that I think people could gain from studying his work, which I got from this masterclass, was that we've got these three levels of eros. And eros, love, right? We generally will satisfy our need for love through sex, through sexuality. That's what the word eroticism immediately makes you think of, like something pornographic in your mind. So as long as our society is stuck there, this level one of eros is really the end of the game. You have sex, and then apparently you lose interest in that person, and then you've got two choices. You either go and find another person to fall in love with, which is why marriages are falling apart rampantly. You do this polyamory thing, which gives you the thrill of having sex with a new meat suit, until that grows old, and then you have to find another one, and maybe you have a big orgy, and you're just like kind of sucking and fucking your way through life.
Yeah.
Great. In the words of Jamie Wheel, like the lizard brain, what is it? Lizard brain fuck monkey sort of way of going about life. That's fine. That's
I've
one
been
way to
there.
do it. Well, we all have. Like
We
we
had
think
the
about it probably every day. It's just like a
Yeah,
natural thing. Like, man, that girl's hot. I mean, you just think about sex. It's always on our mind. And when we were in our teens and 20s, that was certainly the name of the game. Like, what's your number? Like, did you bang her? Did you get her?
yeah,
Did you guys fuck? I mean, like that was just how guys talked. But at that level too, when you start, whether it's the second date or it's 20 years later, at some point something changes and it doesn't feel like falling in love anymore. That's where the hard work begins. That's where you either go and find a new person to fall in love with, back to level one, but you're going to eventually end up in level two again in this hard space of not wanting to be with this person anymore. Or you chose to actually do the work. Is this person somebody I want to work with on this? And they have to decide as well. over the next however many years, you could arrive at level 3 eros, which is that's the transcendent state. That's when you see an old couple holding hands and kissing and they're like 85 and you're like, what the fuck? That's amazing. But we've been modeled by most men in our lives that like, oh, it's, you get married, you go to a nursing home and you die someday, and you just have to deal with your old ball and chain. That is a message from somebody who's never evolved past level 2. If you can work together, this is really what tantra is all about. You don't fulfill love through sexuality. Sexuality is a consequence of deep, deep love for one another. So, any man out there who's really thoughtful about this process, you're going to see your partner change. Their body's going to change. They might have not as flat of a belly anymore. They might not have as much time to work out. Maybe they totally change. If you're just attracted to them physically, this is going to be really hard work. But it even could just be there's kids now in your life. You're not connecting and fucking and sucking all the time. There's actually got to be something deeper because you guys are on this journey together. If you're willing to put in that work, you can reach that level 3. But you need to also really start embracing the change that comes after pregnancy to you, to your partner, this little baby who wants you to keep them alive, and this whole family unit. That is the work of the men who are listening to podcasts. That's the work that we all have to do. We owe it to our kids, to our families, to ourselves to realize that you can go back to level 1 as many times as you want, but you're going to end up at level 2. It's like an insane person who keeps walking off, the ledge into a pool and wondering why they nearly drowned over and over and over again. So, so this is a bit of maybe an embellishment of, I think, the role of a man in pregnancy and childbirth, but I actually think this is the point because it also, I think we go through this as well. Like we don't want to give up our 2-hour workout routines and everything. It changes dramatically, and it's helpful sometimes. It was for me to say out loud on behalf of my partner, things are going to change. But nobody really talks about that. They just talk about how shitty it is to have kids and how, oh man, the kids and the wife. Am I right? Like, I don't like that. I don't talk to people about that because I love my wife and kids. And it's simultaneously the hardest thing with all of my achievements and accomplishments, the hardest thing in the world to look at a little baby who's screaming their heads off and to not judge, to not feel insecure, to not feel like I'm lacking, but to just be present with them. That is a tremendously hard exercise nowadays in the age of TikTok and Instagram and everything else.
Yeah, we as you were talking, I was thinking about um, the you mentioned tantra, and I've been through a lot of tantric practices, and really just being with sensation. And I think about how porn has really thrown people off, and I'll just speak for myself. Is if when I was consuming porn regularly or even at all, uh, my like the possibility of me getting distracted by other women or a hot chick walking by
Oh yeah,
was way up. And then when
yeah,
I cut that shit out, the visual appeal became of what I was seeing in those movies uh, dissipated, and my ability to have better sex, to enjoy the
yeah,
partner that I have, and to have better sex went up. And it's gotten to the point, if you, again, I'll speak for myself. I don't know how this is going to work for other guys, but if you cut it out for a good 6 months, you're going to notice your sex life improve.
yeah,
And, and in ways that I can't explain because you don't know until you go there. Um, and, you know, sometimes I look at my fiance and I imagine her fat. Just like what if she puts on, like, has a kid and has an extra 20 pounds hanging around, and it's because I do realize that things get tough, and I go, wow, I'm gonna still love her, you know,
mm,
even when the body changes. And
yeah,
we haven't been together long enough to get to that, that 85-year-old thing. And I would say we've transitioned out of the honeymoon stage, and it's more of the, we're choosing each other. every day instead of, the what are called the love drugs keeping you
Yeah.
together. Because, the love drugs last a good 6, 9 months, sometimes longer.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, they wear off. And yeah, I think that's a lot of wisdom you just dropped for a lot of men. Because I know for myself, I did a lot of living, and it's one of those things where I'm tired of, the all the action really, and
Yeah.
really ready to go. Okay, I'm the next level. The next level of things that excite me is family, is developing someone else, and realizing that all these things that I wanted to be and all the things that my ego wanted just aren't that important. And part of it is I went out and I satisfied, what the ego wanted quite a bit. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm gonna go make the money. I'm gonna go be with the chicks. I'm gonna try out polyamory. I'm gonna try out all this stuff, And then at the end of the day, you go, oh, I'm just right where I started, same spot.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right.
Oh, right where I started. And I do encourage people, if they have this incredible urge to get out there and do something that other people are saying is silly, sometimes you just got to go do it. You got to
Just
go,
got to learn for yourself. Yeah. Learn,
yeah,
like, you'll learn one way or the other. If it's the hard way, that's fine. Um, what I do think happens more often than not, though, is that polyamory thing ends up destroying the relationship, degrading it in such a way, your original relationship, that you could never have surmised, or anticipated. So the reason I think sometimes it does work is when you've managed to work through the level 2 with one person, and then you're bringing somebody else in, and now you're going to work on through that level 2 with them as well. Like, that is really hard work.
yeah,
It's hard enough to have one partner. I don't know how I would necessarily do it with two at the same time, but the polyamory thing works as a consequence of you demonstrating that you can transcend through that level 2. And and so I agree with you. I agree with you. I don't think that there's one right way to do it. I'm also one person, but I have a lot of friends, a lot of very masculine friends who have really embodied the type of man that I want to be. I have a lot of mentors with different aspects, attributes that I borrow from in order to figure out how is it that I want to show up every day. And you're right. It starts with just choosing love in the morning.
yeah,
And I remember there was a book. Remember that book? It was Steve Covey, I think, was the author. The Habits of Effective People. 7 Habits of Highly Effective
that's
People
right.
was the name.
Yep.
It
Yeah, I
was like,
remember that one. That was a great one.
original. It was like an OG of self-help books for men who were sort of in our space. And I read it when I was in early in college and didn't have too much really life experience to apply it, apart from let me see how productive I can be.
Yeah, context matters.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. If I read that now, it'd be with a totally different set of eyes. Now that
Totally.
I'm married with kids, and I don't just have another level of education, being
Right.
rewarded to me for passing tests, but there was I remember a little snippet that has stuck with me for my entire life, and that was that somebody wrote into this guy Stephen Covey, and the guy was like, I'm just not happy with my wife anymore. I'm not attracted to her. I don't feel like I love her anymore. I don't know what to do, and I don't want to leave our marriage because our kids and blah blah blah, like all this stuff people talk about in poorly orchestrated men's groups. And it's just like, boo hoo, we're all gonna like boo hoo together. Stephen Covey's response was, love her. He was like, but you don't get it. I don't love her anymore. And he was like, no, listen to me. You need to love her. That is exactly what these levels that I'm describing, that's exactly what this is about. You have to choose to love her. And in the same way with a little kid, you have to choose to love that baby who's screaming at you, just begging for authentic presence. Like, when are we authentically present with anybody anymore? We're just looking to get the next deal, to make the next move, when really your family and you as a person don't need anything if you've worked through this level 2 and you've chosen love in the morning. And going back to like what we were talking about with birth and everything, with hordes of children being brought into the world in the absence of the love hormone oxytocin, which is given synthetically, but it's not the same chemical. It's a synthetic analog. It's called Pitocin. It's what women are getting all the time in hospitals. It's not the same thing. If birth, as an allegory for um, birth, is like love embodied, this process is all a matter of love. If we're doing that and kids aren't coming into the world in love, for years, babies were stripped from their mothers right after, and this still happens all the time. Clamp and cut the cord, got to get the baby on the warmer over here. They did that because they were worried that the colostrum, which is the early milk before milk comes into the breast, there's this like highly saturated, extremely nutrient rich stuff called colostrum. We used to think that that was dangerous for the baby. So this practice of getting the baby away from the mother as quickly as possible was thought to be like protective in some way.
What would lead to that? What would lead to that
I
belief?
have no idea. I have no clue. I mean, there are so many things within the birth world, dude, that when you guys are pregnant, you just text me and you walk me through what it is that they're telling you, and I will help you out. No problem. Um, but yeah, in a world where babies aren't being born into love, like how can we expect the world to get any better? We're all just walking around with a lizard brain monkey, fuck monkey mentality, as
Yeah.
opposed to like actively loving. It's an active process.
So when say a couple comes to you and they're
Yeah.
pregnant, what's that process look like?
My first visit with people who come to work with me is usually just getting to know their story. It would be like you and I meet at a party at the Rybczynski's house, and we're just hanging out, getting to know each other. We don't start talking shop. We don't start comparing our numbers. We don't go to the gym and say who can deadlift the most weight. Like that's all silliness. You and I would get to know each other. I think that in order for us to serve one another as friends, as family, as a client physician interaction, I need to know everything about you. Why are you here? Where have you come from? What is your purpose right now? And where do you want to go? And once I understand your values and your beliefs, perhaps where you find strength, what are the scariest things you can imagine happening, now we can start to actually put a plan of care together so that you can exercise your full autonomy, meaning making decisions for you, by you, and in conjunction perhaps with your partner, perhaps even in conjunction with conversations that you're having with the soul of your baby, which a lot of women experience, but they're kind of told that that can't be possible. But it actually absolutely happens. I met our second daughter in the womb when we did a little mushroom journey, and like fully, very clearly my daughter. And later I realized, oh man, I really was talking to her. I mean, you don't have to use mushrooms, but the point being, women are connected deeply with their growing baby, and all of that information is way more important to me than what do your labs show, what does your imaging show, and all that other stuff. That comes later, but that's the first step, is to get to know their story, and then shortly after, I want to optimize every aspect of your life, given your resources and your time and energy and ability to do that. Because if we get you as healthy as possible, ideally before you get pregnant, but if we get you as healthy as possible, the likelihood of you having pregnancy complications, ending up in the hospital, ending up with an unnecessary C-section, whatever, it goes down to almost zero. Healthy people have healthy births. If a person doesn't, there was something that was missed. Perhaps it was some sort of genetic something, or nutrient deficiency, or stress, or poor sleep, whatever. If you can get all of those modifiable risk factors in order through diet, movement, hydration, sleep, breathing, mindset, etc., then you're going to have the most likely, you're more likely going to be able to exercise autonomy and have birth wherever you want it, in whatever way you can imagine.
What got you here? What I mean, I always find it weird then when I meet like an OBGYN that's a man, and I just think about, okay, you went to med school, and then at some point you said, you know what, I'm gonna choose that lane. Or maybe someone wants to be that, and that's why they go to med school. But it's always perplexed me because that's something that never crossed my mind. I almost I started taking the steps to go to med school at one point. Thank God I didn't. I would have been
Thank
terrible.
God you didn't. Would have been you would have been ejected more quickly than I was.
Yeah, it would not have been a good
You would have
fit.
lasted 3 seconds, my man.
Oh, well, I was dating a girl that was in pharmacy school, and she really wanted to marry a doctor, so she was trying to talk me into it, and became a gym owner instead. That then evolved into being a even more of a degenerate on a podcast. But the
That's funny.
yeah, just it. I went to my first OBGYN appointment with my fiance a couple weeks ago, and it really blew me away. 41 years old, and I've never been to one of these. And I've been with, women my entire adult life. I was married for 9 years previously.
No kidding.
Yeah. And I still, you know, never made that trip. And I go in and I'm like, what is this guy going to be like? This guy's going to be weird. He ended up being really cool. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, how did you get here? What got you to this spot?
Well, I've always been very left-brained in my orientation, and when grow up in a relatively, it's a middle-class neighborhood. Um, Kids from your high school get into good colleges. You sort of are like, well, what am I going to do with my life? You're expected at age 16 or 17, whenever you graduate from college or from high school, to pick a profession. What's your calling? And you're like still trying to just get ass in high school. Like, who knows what you want your life to look like? But it seemed to me like smart people who did well on exams went into medicine. I don't know where I got that from, but I was like, I guess that's what I'm going to do. So, in high school was easy. If it is for most people who are able to like dedicate themselves to a half hour of studying before exams. And and I don't mean to diminish the experience of being in high school because a lot of people had trouble, but I also don't really like our education system at all. I just happened to be like, it was just, you just kind of get carried by the current. And so when you go to, I got to college and then, long story short, yes, I ended up going to medical school. I went to Temple University in Philly, and kind of an unconventional medical school class. There was a guy there who was a National Geographic photographer who wanted to change careers. There was a woman who was like 47 who had 3 adult children, and or borderline adult children, like a lot of unorthodox. It wasn't a bunch of like just 26-year-old kids from yuppie communities that were going there. And
Yeah.
so a lot of life experience came into that. And as med school works in most situations where you do 2 years of hard book study, and then 2 years of clinical rotations where you go into the surgery, you go into neurology for some time, um, pediatrics, family medicine, whatever. The entire way, my left brain mode of thinking was still very creative. I liked music, I liked art, I liked all of my notebooks, instead of having notes, were like sketches of weird anime kind of shit. And um, when you get into the hard sciences, that's not really what you're supposed to be doing. You're supposed to be diligently taking notes and all this other stuff. And I would just kind of wing it in every way. It was exciting, but then I realized as you're going through all this hard studying, you're being rewarded with more studying, and then you're being rewarded with more studying. It was just this endless, like, there's no final boss level. You just keep getting more tests, and if you do well enough, you get to go on to do more tests. So that started wearing on me quite a bit, and I realized, man, if I'm a surgeon, I have to know exactly every little thing here, and if I'm a neurologist, I have to know all of this stuff. With birth, to me, it seemed like there's no answer to this test. Like, what a fun discovery. Nobody knows what's happening here. Like, we try, and I saw them all doing their medicines and all this stuff, and I was like, that is a fucking miracle, what I just saw. So I figured, whoa, the women who are a little bit healthier tend to have less complicated pregnancies. I was like an Ironman distance triathlete. I was climbing and doing all this athletic stuff, and I was taking care of my body super well. What if I could apply this wellness stuff in an OBGYN setting? We would have better birth outcomes and all of that. But then, you're rewarded after med school with a matching process through this algorithm. I landed at a program out in LA for residency, and I realized this is not, you're expected to have the answer to this test. And my like left brain orientation did not like that. It just started pushing back on it. Like, me telling women how a birth was going to go, or me coming to them with the answer. We're going to do this thing. Nonsense about the conversation. This is what we're doing. I'm the doctor. Here's my white coat to prove it. Here's how we're doing it. I just didn't like that. There was no creativity. There was no curiosity. And if we have anything to learn from the past couple years, doctors are not incentivized to critically think. They're not incentivized to be curious or to ask questions, which is why over the past 2.5 years, I've lost 2 jobs. It was like the final nudge I needed from the universe to get out
Mm.
altogether, because I took my mask off while caring for a guy who's dying, hasn't seen a face in 18 months, clipped his toenails, rubbed his hands and legs with lotion, just loved on this guy. And I took my mask off because he hadn't seen a face, and I got fired the next day. So
Wow.
I don't even care about COVID. I really don't give a shit. There was something happened though during COVID, which was doctors losing their platforms, their licenses, their whole livelihood without any dignity, because they were providing perhaps some risks, validating the resistance or apprehension about getting a new experimental device injected into their arm. I actually think that's good medicine if we're asking questions. Maybe it was a good thing to do to vaccinate and all this stuff. I don't think so. I think it was pretty fucked up. But when doctors were providing the risks of a vaccine without wholeheartedly giving the benefits alone and then losing their licenses, that's a violation of bioethics. I can't provide you information for you to exercise your autonomy, in other words, make an informed decision, if I'm not also giving you the risks. We see this with circumcision, we see this all over the board. And that was a validation, what we've seen over the past couple of years, for everything I had experienced in my residency, which was really, really hard for me to not be giving the full complement of risks and benefits and asking, well, hey, this person doesn't want a C-section. Is there something else we can do? Can we get a little bit more creative? Do we have to be checking their cervix every 4 hours when it's not giving any information that's helping to change their course, in order to get a better outcome? Um, One little story I always tell people is, I was so tired in residency that I had to figure out a way to do less work. And there were times I was so tired, Mike, that I would have like my pager like nestled in my crotch, so that if it rang, I would actually wake up, because I was so absolutely depleted. Like, it wouldn't work to just call the phone. I'm not going to answer. You have to
Yeah.
vibrate my nutsack for me to wake up. So, so I was like, why am I waking up in the middle of the night to do nothing? Like, I'm interrupting her sleep. The nurses are sort of annoyed. Like, why am I being paged to do this thing that isn't even helping anybody?
Yeah.
So I started figuring out a way to do less work. And lo and behold, when you intervene less in childbirth, things go better, which is why now I'm like a home birth advocate. We even had a home birth ourselves. I attend home births outside of the hospital. It's what I do in the birth specific work I do. So all of this is to say that I was too curious, I was too thoughtful, I was in some ways, too compassionate to use protocols to do the thing that I had invested nearly $500,000 to learn how to do. And
Whew.
so now, I mean, it's a pretty penny to go to medical school nowadays. So now I get to do things really differently. I get to do things based on their terms, on their turf, in their homes. I do a lot of lifestyle medicine. I use a lot of functional labs for fertility all the way through menopause. Like, I get to do the stuff that incentivizes me to be as curious as I possibly can, because people find me after they've been passed around and nobody can figure it out. And here I am in my garage wearing Uggs, drinking Feel Free and mixing up Organifi while I'm talking to them on the phone. Like, it's like a very, very different experience than the donuts in the lounge at the hospital, for sure.
Oh man. How long you been doing this?
I started med school in 2010. And so if you include medical school, it's been over a decade. But the way I've been doing this now is about a little over a year. That's when I got that universal nudge with a little severance
So
package
you
to
got the
make me
nudge.
feel a little.
Is that why you started showing up my Instagram more?
Probably because I was just like, fuck this. I'm tired of saying things that people want to hear. I want to say things and resonate out that energy so that people know that there are people in the medical community that are not total assholes and that are deeply, deeply in reverence of the process of being alive, giving birth, and ultimately dying. I mean, that's what everything I do is related to that. And when the other part is that when you're in the medical system, you can't take care of yourself. They are the most broken down people. It's the training itself is so dehumanizing. You can't pee, poop, have sex, laugh, or love anybody without their permission. So, like, you show up at a person's bedside, of course, you don't know how to care for a person. You don't even know how to care for yourself. So, I get to take care of myself and experiment through, you know, the lifestyle stuff, the check program, all this other stuff in order to make my health best. And I get 90 minutes at a time with a client who's interested and they're getting there, but they're still struggling with fertility. So as I've been working with people for years now, even in residency, now I have a platform whereby I can tell people, listen, here's what you really need to know about this thing. Your doctor's going to be saying things that are through the lens of a medical industrial complex that incentivizes revenue over outcomes, over humanity. And that's okay. We can let them do that. You can go to the hospital to get the things that you need. If you get run over by a car, don't come to me. Go to the hospital. On the other hand, we can build some muscle. We can get your insulin in order. We can get your nutrient deficiencies cleared up. I'm also studying anthroposophy. So I work on the mental, emotional, and spiritual levels, the etheric and astral. I do quite a bit of meditation. I very, very fluid kind of movement guy. I mean, all of those things are relevant to a person's human experience. So I'm no longer treating disease. I'm helping people harmonize with their surroundings so that they can be the best versions of themselves, so to speak. They can love as hard as they want. They can be connected to something bigger than themselves, and they can have babies on their own terms. I mean, like, what a great job I have.
What are some common areas that people are missing when you meet them? Like certain things about their health that isn't in line. Um, you know, pelvic floor health. Like what's
Mm.
some common things that men and women should be considering before even getting pregnant?
I think that we are underemphasizing the role of quality sleep because I have this little catchphrase: productivity over pregnenolone. That's how we're all trained to think. Pregnenolone, of course, being the mother hormone in the adrenals, it produces all of your salt, sugar, and sex regulation, regulating hormones. And you can like eat the best diet possible, drink the cleanest water, go and spend like $4,000 on a home filtration system from whatever any of these companies, Aquasana or Greenfield or whatever. But if you're not sleeping, it's like trying to polish a turd. You cannot do it. You're going to end up broken down. And I had the same experience in residency during these long hours. There was periods of 6 weeks of night float where you've got 5 or 6 hours between getting off of work at 11 a.m. and going back to work at 5 p.m., where you have to sleep as much as you can for 6 weeks. You never even see the daylight. So instead of me sleeping, I wanted to maintain boulder shoulders and rock hard abs. So I'd go and there was a CrossFit gym that I worked at. I would stop there on the way to my next however many hours shift, 18-hour shift, and I would do like a 30-minute hard, high intensity like AMRAP, where I'm like on the ground at the end. But I got to get to work. Go into work, use a little washcloth, wash up. Got my pile of protein and veggies and all this paleo stuff, and I still look good. I feel good. My triceps are all striated. I look great. I feel great until you don't, and you end up just broken down. It's called adrenal fatigue. And um, so despite having the physique and I just thought the world of myself, look, I can do it all. It eventually catches up with you. And that's especially relevant because your adrenals and your ovaries are in close communication with one another and all the other endocrine organs. But if your adrenals are skunked, you're not going to produce enough of the sex hormones, which are required for your ovaries to convert androgens from the adrenals and from within the ovaries themselves into estrogen in order to ovulate. So this goes for men and women. We're not sleeping enough. We're overly stressed. Um, I think the second thing kind of goes into this is we need to slow the fuck down. Like we're all, again, productivity over pregnenolone. You need pregnenolone to source all of those adrenal hormones. You have to be sleeping. You need to be slowing down. Your greatest currency is not time, it is presence. Going back to earlier conversation, I'd say those are the two biggest things. The third thing, especially for women, is that we've become so concerned with having rock hard abs that we're blowing out our pelvic floors. This goes for men as well, but it's a little bit cooler and funnier when a man farts accidentally versus a woman in our society. So, this notion that you need to keep your abs flexed and flat at all times. There's only one way for that pressure to go. When you expand your diaphragm and you increase the pressure inside your abdominal cavity, where's it going to go? It's going to push down through your pelvic floor. So this obsession with flat stomachs and abs, yes, ladies, it looks great, but especially when you go through pregnancy, your pelvic floor is going to be especially weakened. And if you don't get your breathing patterns right, especially if you're paradoxically breathing, you're going to blow out your pelvic floor. It happens. It's happening everywhere, especially, unfortunately, amongst the CrossFitters and all that. Why am I leaking urine? It's because you don't know how to breathe. And that's something that can be trained by people like me and you. Alex Rubchinsky, a friend of ours, talks about this all the time. I'd say those three things are probably missing the most. And I'll add that nature provides us with all of the vitamins and nutrients that we need. The four components of the multivitamin that I recommend to people is organ meats from good sources, all of these things. Bone broth, a fermented cod liver oil, or just a really high quality fish oil. And what's the last one? I said fish oil, organ meats, bone broth, and oysters or other bivalve shellfish like mussels, clams, etc.
I was just in
Um,
Brazil. I was
oh
on
yeah,
yeah, we were there were six of us, rented a boat, had a boat captain, and took us to different beaches. This dude rolls over in a paddleboard cooler full of oysters,
oh my god,
and
fresh oysters.
just like pulls it out, and he goes, it's good for the man," like pulls out his fist.
Absolutely,
He's like,
yeah.
we don't speak the same language. They pretty much, we got the message. He's like, I bought a bunch off of him, and Ashley was excited.
Yeah, it's funny. Oysters are kind of like my sort of magic bullet in a way. I mean, you can again, you have to be sleeping and doing all the other things, but if you are doing that, I add oysters for my fertility clients. I have the male especially, but both men and women can do this and benefit.
Uh-huh.
3 cans of smoked oysters. I get mine from Patagonia
Yep.
Provisions
Those are my
per
favorite.
week. Yeah, they're so good with it's not like sriracha, but it's like there's like a pimiento something. It's
Uh-huh.
a delicious blend. 3 cans of those per week, and you're going to be so loaded with nutrients that are specifically required for the development of healthy sperm, which nowadays normal would have been considered infertile 100 years ago. Like our
Right.
sperm counts have dropped dramatically, cell phones in the pockets, not sleeping, deranged adrenals, etc. But if you have all that stuff in order, oysters are not only an aphrodisiac, but they also uh, are, contain all of the nutrients in order to benefit healthy sperm
What
um,
about eating
and
just
much growth.
testicle?
I don't know. That's a good question. I'll have to look into that. There's that liver guy who eats testicles online all the time.
The liver
Probably got like
king.
100 trillion healthy swimmers in every ejaculation. So,
Yeah, I
um,
well, I hung out with Paul Saldino, well, several times, but the first time I hung out with him, he whips out a do you know Paul Saldino,
yeah,
carnivore
yeah,
MD
carnivore
guy?
code guy.
Yeah, he whips out a raw testicle. This will be good for your nuts. Like,
When you say whip out, did he just like have it in his pocket? Hey, check it out! I got this raw testicle here. You want to eat it?
you know what? It wouldn't surprise me with him, but he had a little Tupperware stuffed in a backpack. He pulls it out, and it actually was really really good, really really
Was it
good.
really?
Yeah, it was.
Wasn't seasoned or anything.
No, no, it
Wow.
was. It reminded me of just a great sushi. It was
No
really
kidding.
tender, easy to eat. I took one over to Alex Rybczynski and sliced one up for him. He
No
enjoyed it
way.
as well. Yeah,
How
I get
big are they?
I get lamb. They're from lamb. They're
Whoa.
a little bit bigger than my fist. So yeah, I've
I
got
gotta try that. Next time
yeah.
I'm in Austin, I want you to feed me some testes.
I have some in my freezer from one of my last kills. Uh, yeah, so I was curious if you knew anything about that. The other thing that's really hot right now is
Mm,
peptides. Is it do you have any concerns with peptides or the way that people are using them? Or there was one peptide that um, we heard about. Ashley doesn't use any peptides. I've used a few. Um, but she was interested in one that it increases fertility but also decreases appetite, and it just
mm,
didn't really seem like the right answer to me when I heard that.
yeah,
I was like
yeah.
I don't know. And she wasn't going to take it for fertility. It was like, oh yeah, like there's some women in the area, they're taking this one peptide and they've all gotten really lean. And yeah, curious what you think about
Which
that
one
type
was
of
it? I'm
stuff.
curious. Do you remember?
I, even if you said it, I'm not sure I would
Yeah, yeah.
remember. Yeah. All those peptide
Well,
names are hard to remember. I need to be taking the peptide that helps my memory, and then
yeah,
I would be able
right,
to
exactly,
spit them all out. Yeah.
exactly. I bet testes are rich in those amino acids. um, so here's my thing about the peptides and a lot of this other IV and IM and sub Q administration of these things. The biohacking community has always been near and dear to me. I've used it, various biohacking techniques for years. However, it's a bit of a shortcut, I think, where I know a lot of people, I won't use any names, but I've hung out with some high profile people that you would probably know who are, they have bourbon at night and then they eat like a bowl of, you know, gluten laden, crappy dairy something in the morning and they have like some shitty snacks during the day, but they did get their peptides. So, so again, I don't want to, I don't want to say it's bad or people are bad or that they're doing it wrong or that I'm some sort of super gifted thinker about this. But why not get everything we need from our food? Because we can. And if you can't get it from food, is that something that is necessarily going to be beneficial in the long term?
Right.
The reason I say that is let's say that you had something that helped your let's take total testosterone or TRT, testosterone replacement therapy. Maybe it's good for certain things. A lot of people take it. A lot of my good friends take it. They feel better on it. Fine. But when you consider the delicate orchestration of your endocrine system, the hypothalamus, pituitary, thyroid, adrenals, gonads, to name a few, they're all balancing one another out in this really beautiful, delicate way that we absolutely do not have the brain power as a society to replicate perfectly. We can't. And that's okay. It's the same as saying, if you took cellulose and some, I don't know, some minerals and some mycorrhizae, you can build a tree. It doesn't work like that. The nature has this beautiful way of doing things that is far beyond our understanding. And that's actually why life is so much fun. If you were to inject a hormone into your body, you may replace the deficient hormone, but at the expense of perhaps throwing off any of these feedback loops. So, as a long term therapy, I don't think any hormone replacement is good, whether it's biologic, synthetic, or whatever. I think it's a good bridge while you're getting certain things in order in your lifestyle. Like, I don't know, you're on like you go to Mexico for a month and you want to use some peptides to boost your, their peptides are chains of amino acids. If you wanted to boost that up a little bit for a period of time, or if it's for a specific event you're training for or whatever, that's great. But I don't think it's healthy to consider these as a replacement for the the bare essentials for a healthy lifestyle. Most of the stuff that you need can be gathered from nature's multivitamins. And I'll add to that list of the four eggs, except that some people are pretty intolerant to the protein in egg. Um, so that's my position. I don't think it's a bad thing, But when I see people using it as a like, I just drank all this alcohol, I'll just shoot this thing into my leg later and I'll feel better. Like you're missing the point. Like you're not doing anything for yourself. You can't bypass a healthy lifestyle any more than you can like go and compete in Olympic lifting without going through the rehearsed like very basic biomechanics of a snatch or a clean. So there's a little conflict there for me. I don't think it's bad. I just don't think it's also like a replacement for the fundamentals.
Yeah, and the psychology that comes along with it. You know, I've taken BPC 157 as
Yeah,
to help with my digestion,
yeah, yeah,
and um, a month into it, my digestion's feeling really good, and then someone's like, "Oh, there's a pizza." It's like, psh, my digestion can handle that now. I got BPC 157 on my side. It's like that's I get and I watch that conversation happen in my head. I'm like, dude, you took this because your digestion needed improvement, probably because you ate some stuff you weren't supposed to,
that's exactly right.
and
Yeah,
now you're taking this, and your mind wants to come in and say, well, you can do it because you got you're pretty good because of this thing, and like I'm totally aware of it. And it's funny. I don't eat the pizza most of the time, but it is
yeah, most of the time.
it's funny how the justification comes in with
Sure,
some of these
sure.
things as well.
Yeah, yeah. I am a bit of a naturalist. I might be a little bit of a fundamentalist in that way, but I also see people. I mean, Paul Chek's one of my greatest mentors and friends, and the guy is pretty darn minimalist. Like he eats food. That's it. Sometimes he might take a little of this squirt from Symbiotica or a couple tablets of Mast Cymes from Bioptimizers or one of these great products. Great companies, they make great clean products. If you're going to take anything, get them from some of these brands that
Yeah.
are, in our circles. But however, Paul is taking great care of himself from physical all the way up through spiritual. And if he does deviate and have a piece of pizza, or last time I was there, we just were getting stoned eating popcorn, watching Ancient Civilizations or Neil Young, like we can have a bowl of popcorn, it's fine. But he's like, oh, not a second bowl, it's going to fuck me up. If there was something that prevented him from getting fucked up, he still wouldn't have the extra bowl of popcorn. Like it's a matter of indulging responsibly
Hmm.
and not using these tools as a means of bypassing the hard work of breaking addictions and cravings and everything else. Like that's really the hard work. So the less exogenous stuff you're putting in, the better off you're going to be long term. And if you can get that from, like I said, organ meats, shellfish, the carnivore diet's doing a pretty good job for a lot of people. I mean, I don't want to overly plug that because I'm not a fan of fad diets, but I think if most of your calories are coming from the animal world, you're probably going to do pretty well. If I was on a desert island, it'd be organ meats, some oysters, and eggs, and hopefully I'll catch some fatty fish because we're
Hmm.
on the island.
Hmm. I'm with you. Yeah, I'd say the majority of my calories come from meat, and since I started hunting with Monzel last year, and now it's majority of it's meat that I've killed and was out in the wild. So that's an extra
Oh, right
bonus.
on.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Monsel's a great guy. So at his, I don't know what I can say about it. The sacrament, the sacred sacrament that is offered there. I provided them for this this last hunt that we went on, and it was very very connecting, through and through. And he asked me if I would supply, I offered it as a gift, the sacrament going forward on all of his sacred hunts. And through the experience of hunting, there's this conflict that develops. But this is actually a separate rite of passage, I think. Conflict for me was falling in love with this animal and simultaneously wanting to kill it
Yeah.
because I don't need the meat. Like I could go to Whole Foods and get it, but right now it's in my crosshairs and I'm going to kill it. That was a that's a that was hard for me. I did miss, but I wanted to kill it. and and that experience of hunting and whatnot, you don't have any of those weird pornographic thoughts. You don't have any of that distraction. You're not doing peptides and whatnot. You're eating organ meats. You're connecting with the ground, with this animal. That's, I think, where I would love to see people's energies being put into, as opposed to finding clinics that are providing expensive peptides and whatnot. Because at the end of the day, if you get a flat in your bicycle tire, you could use those little CO2 cartridges and just keep pumping them in there. It's $10 a shot. Bam, 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 bam. Or you could just go get your flat fixed, get a new tire or a new tube or whatever else. And that's going to last you for a lot longer. So all of these technologies, these biohacking tricks, you can't biohack your way out of an unhealthy lifestyle, period.
Yeah.
And I think you and I both know people in this biohacking space that have demonstrated that for us, so we can learn from their mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything else you want to leave the audience with before we go?
Oh man, it's great to see you face to face. Maybe we'll get to hug it out in person someday.
I think so. I think so. And you're in Kentucky, is that right?
I'm in Kentucky. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nobody comes to Kentucky, so I'll be in Austin.
I've got family from if I do my ancestry, my lineage,
Yeah.
they spent a good amount of time in Kentucky. That's like where they landed, I guess. They hit the
Oh, no
coast and then
kidding.
went there. Yeah,
It's a beautiful place.
bunch of
Everything
hillbillies.
grows here. Yeah, I mean there's a lot of that. There's a lot of like strange politics and all this other stuff here. Wendell Berry, like the OG biodynamic, well, not the OG biodynamic farmer, the OG regenerative farmer, we'll say. He was like 45 minutes from here is where he lived. He's written some of the most compelling, eloquent farmer, eloquent uh, books on a more natural, regenerative, integrative model for
Mm,
agriculture that I've ever read. And that was like 50, 60 years ago, or maybe not that long, maybe 40 years ago. Everything grows well here. There's a lot of just leave us alone kind of attitude, and I love that. So there's
yeah,
a lot of good in Kentucky as well. It's just kind of off the map for a lot of people. You can't even point out which one it is.
yeah. Well, I'm from Tennessee, so I know exactly where it is.
Oh, you
Uh,
definitely do. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. And it is interesting that you live in one of the most fertile places in the U.S. and
that's right.
you do what you do. I think that's a very
Yeah.
interesting thing.
Yeah, the goal is to have a farm here soon. I'd like to have at least 20 acres, but if I had 300 acres, that'd be great too. But that's what we're saving up for. That's the future of Beloved Holistics. That's where I'm gonna have a birth and death retreat space where we grow all of our own food. We apply biodynamic principles, which is something I'm also studying,
What principles?
and
Oh,
biodynamics. It's
biodynamic.
one of the
Okay.
branches of Steiner's work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. So that's the goal. That's the future of me and my family.
Jet. Where can people find you? You got I know you got Instagram, but yeah, what do you have to
Yeah.
offer us?
So I've got my practice is Beloved Holistics. I operate through a private association, sort of like a Costco membership. Once you make an annual donation to the PCA, you get access to my menu of services. I do one-on-ones still, although that's becoming less of what I'm doing because I'm building several courses. But I've got an integrative, holistic approach to fertility, a course through the Chek Institute coming out in a week. I'm building a sort of the only childbirth education course that you'll ever need with Sarah Rosser at the farm. She's actually one of Ina May's, the legacy, the farm in Tennessee. She just resigned from there, but we're working on this incredible program together called Born Free. And then I have packages. I'm also releasing a fertility program that's very comprehensive called the Patience, Reverence, and Presence Fertility Program, PRP, which will include time with me, all the functional stuff and everything that I do. But fertility is becoming such an issue that it goes beyond just the doctor's office. I've got a psychic medium, Emily the medium, who communicates with the spirit of babies. I've got Chris Crawford, who's an osteopath and somatherapist in the program. He's going to be. These are all people that clients will get to work with. Sarah Gustafson is going to do a session with people. I've got a Chinese medicine doctor, a functional medicine doc, basically the whole gambit. Sarah Tromoli, one of the most incredible breathwork facilitators I've ever known. That program's a higher price point, but you get everything you need, and it saves you a trip to the IVF clinic where you're going to drop 15 grand because we're gonna get your health fully in alignment on all of those levels: the physical, the etheric, the astral, the spiritual, and get your body as healthy as possible, so that if you can't conceive naturally, which you probably will after you're working with me, you will you'll end up having a higher likelihood of success with IVF. So that's really the brunt of what I'm working on. Like I said, I'm studying now the advanced biogeometry content. I'm studying Tarot, and I'm studying anthroposophy, anthroposophic medicine. So there's going to be far more to come from me in the space as I start to synthesize some of these things together. And I've got a podcast myself, the Holistic OBGYN. Conversations really a lot of the conversations are just like what we talked about here, as opposed to like whatever, the uterus or the cervix, like that's incorporated, but that's like elementary level. Let's go beyond this. Let's expand this conversation a little bit. So people can find me there, and I've got all my social media links on my website, so you can find me there. And Mike, I'm very, very honored to be connected with you and to be able to share this space with you. So thank you.
Thanks for coming and sharing your wisdom with us. Love you,
My
brother.
pleasure, brother.